protagonista Jeremy Allen White.
When Bruce wrote that in 1982, it's as though he wrote the album today. It's an album that speaks, certainly in America, to a certain malaise, kind of a spiritual vacancy, moral ambiguity. Bruce Springsteen is political, but not in the partisan sense, but in the human sense. And his album speaks to people who live on the margins of society. The dispossessed, people who living lives of quiet desperation, people who strive for the American dream and fall short. That's what he wrote about in 1982 and has continued to this day. And I think that's why the album feels so relevant, certainly to me in the times in which we live in America.
Yes, you know, the state of the world or the United States, it's a, you know, there's a lot of anger and confusion going on, but I also hear a lot of hope in the record. Yeah.
Since about 1986, Bruce has been asked to make films about his life. Bruce does't give over his story, and in particular the story of Nebraska, very easily. John Landau, who's portrayed by Jeremy Strong in the film, John Landau said to me, he said, "Scott, this is the first time in 50 years that Bruce has ever handed the wheel over to anybody else." So that was, of course, a lot of pressure, but incredibly rewarding and gratifying, and also because the album Nebraska had such personal resonance for me. My father, to whom I have dedicated the film, introduced me to Bruce Springsteen through Nebraska. And it's a record that I would turn to as I was writing other movies of mine well before this film was even a consideration. So then when I met with John and Bruce for the first time, they're both cinephiles. Bruce watches a lot of movies, and he'd seen all of my films and some a few times. John Landau was a former movie critic, rock critic, and these gentlemen know movies. But for the first hour of our meeting, we just talked about life. We talked about other movies, and then we got to the business of talking about this one, and it was a very quick yes. I'm so thankful it was.
Yeah, I mean, incredible. I think in the beginning, you know, it was such a daunting task. I obviously, you know, I came onto the project a little bit later after the structure and, you know, the script was sort of agreed upon between Scott and Bruce and John. But I think it makes a lot of sense that Bruce chose to have this period be the focus of the film. I think that he was at a real crossroads in life during this time. I think the choices he made over the period of the film made it possible for him to lead the life that he's had for the past 40 years. And for him, yeah, to have wanted me and that him and Scott came to me, I felt very lucky. I remember I took a little bit of time to consider, just because, you know, there is so much pressure. He is such an iconic figure, and originally I didn't want to, I don't know, risk interrupting his sort of fans or audience's relationship with him. And so Scott and I were talking about it for about a week, and then Scott shared with me, you know, Bruce really wants you to do this. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that before? I won't stand in his way. And so I said yes. And he's been lovely, you know, throughout the process, very supportive, and yeah, since the film has come out, very supportive.
I wonder. Certainly, as a filmmaker, you sometimes projects choose you because you feel so compelled to make them. Nebraska was that for Bruce. He didn't even think he was making a record. But then he was leading a life of such quiet desperation that he had to make this record. Of course, I then chose to make this particular film. But some films that I make come to me, and very much, many of the scenes come to me while, believe it or not, while I'm sleeping, while I'm dreaming. So those sort of things you can never account for. I think it's hard to say. It's case by case. But for this one, I certainly was desperately wanted to make it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, so much of this film is about sort of honesty and the feeling of fraudulence, and I think that moment in the beginning of the film, and also Bruce coming home to New Jersey, he's not recognizing his older self, or he's having trouble recognizing the place he came from, and it's just not sounding honest to him. I think him switching off the radio was that sense of feeling like fraud, or not recognizing the man that made that record, and then I think, you know, the making of Nebraska was so instinctual, but Scott said it, you know, he didn't know what he was making, you know, he didn't know what it was going to be, if anything, and I think when you're working from that place, you can't help but make it honest, because you're not thinking about the result, you know.
Raccontate un uomo che effettivamente affronta i propri demoni, il proprio dolore, e ne racconta una storia. Lavora su Nebraska in totale solitudine, anche contro le regole musicali che lo vedevano chiaramente nel ruolo di Bruce Springsteen. Oggi sarebbe impossibile realizzare un album come Nebraska, secondo voi? Perché insomma siamo bombardati continuamente da distrazioni, e non so se la concentrazione del qui ed ora possa essere attuale e quindi in qualche modo replicabile. Non lo so, chiedo a voi.
It's interesting because when Bruce made Nebraska, the process for Bruce and for almost all musicians was to go into a studio, to write in the studio, to record in the studio. So what Bruce is doing was completely unorthodox, to record in his bedroom. Today, many albums are recorded at home. Younger musicians, older musicians, they have the capabilities to record in a home studio, and then they have the capability to perfect their voice, perfect through auto-tune, through protect their musicianship. Bruce was chasing the imperfect. He wanted to recapture the sound that he recorded in the bedroom, so that when you see him going into the Power Station in New York City, into one of the best recording studios in the world, in an effort to recapture the imperfect, the studio was making it better. The musicians were making it better. And Bruce was obsessive about trying to find exactly the sound that he heard in his bedroom, that went through the 4-track recorder that we see, the home recorder, through what's called the echoplex, which gives it a short echo, like those Elvis Sun records that Bruce loved so much, that were an influence for him when he was a young singer. And then, of course, it was mixed down through this boombox, which most kids don't even know what a boombox is today. And because that boombox was essentially corroded, it played the tape back at a slower speed. So all of that came together to give us one of the best albums of the last 50 years, in my estimation, and many estimation from a lot of singers and songwriters that I know in America. So in an effort to find exactly what it was that he was compelled to tell, he went to great lengths, as we see in the film. And today you can do that, I think, with the press of a button. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Scott said it all really on that, but but yeah, I think it's more commonplace. Obviously now you can record a record wherever you are, but at the time it was very radical, and so therefore the sound of the record, the intimacy, how both kind of close you felt, and in the room you felt with Bruce, but there was also like a sort of like a haunting distance, and I think because it's become so commonplace to record at home, and the sound is so good, and so much is possible, and technology has caught up. I don't know. I don't know what would be a radical way to make a record like that today. Yeah.
But this is the most punk record that Bruce has ever made, not in sound but in spirit. And I think that's what separates this particular album from all of his other work.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I met Bruce, he delivered on so much. He delivered on sort of the idea of Bruce Springsteen, and I think getting to meet him in his element, about to perform for 3.5 hours for 90,000 people, was a gift, but also intimidating in a way, knowing that in a few months I would have to try to capture some of this. But in getting to know him and speaking to him, even in that night, I find in his performances, it's so physical. There's almost a violence to his performances on stage, and such a passion. But in speaking to him, he's got such a gentleness, kindness, and real presence. But I think what I took away from sort of, or what I could have maybe learned from in Bruce during this period in his life, but also the process of allowing us to make this film, and like Scott said, to take his hands off the wheel and allow us to tell some of his story, and this story specifically. There was just a tremendous amount of bravery on his part, for leaning on those who were close to him, like John Landau at the time of the film, and then again allowing Scott and I to put our hands on the wheel for a moment. So I think what stands out, and what I have found very admirable throughout the process, making discoveries about Bruce as a young man, but also getting to know him as an older gentleman. I've taken away and admire his bravery, absolutely.
Yeah, the musical underscore is composed by Jeremiah Freites, who is a musician from New Jersey and who happens to be one of the founding members of the American rock band, the Lumineers. And of course, like most everyone else in New Jersey, he grew up a fan of Bruce Springsteen. And when I was writing the screenplay, in the narration, the action of the screenplay, I said that I felt the score would be born out of Terrence Malick's Badlands, in a sense, which we hear a little bit of. And I'm so grateful that Mr. Malick gave me the footage for this. He's been a sort of mentor over the years to me, and of course he only said, you can use the footage, but just make sure you don't show me as an actor, because he's in the film. So Jeremiah and I discussed the instrumentation that would be in the score for Badlands, the glockenspiel, which is also in Nebraska, the piano. But I said to Jeremiah, I said, the sound that I hear is an imperfect sound, much like how I made Nebraska. I made the film Nebraska the same way that Bruce made the record, which is to say minimalist, very stark, no gloss, no spectacle. The camera never looks away. And I said, that's what I think the score should be on a very emotional level. Spare. Bruce so often said to me that even though there's no piano on Nebraska, he heard piano come from Badlands for some reason. So that was something that we used quite a bit. And the piano that he used is so imperfect that when Jeremiah had a professional tuner come to retune the piano, he said, the tuner said, this is junk, this is firewood, you should just get rid of this. But the sound we loved so much because of the imperfections that it seemed to score Bruce's disequilibrium. There's also a man, even though we hear the piano with his relationship with Faye, Bruce is very public about not being able, as you see in the film, to form a real connection with a partner. And inexplicably, when he felt things were going well, he would just pull back. And we were pulling back in certain moments of the score. But it mostly was born out of Terrence Malick's Badlands. The film that Bruce would never agree to be made is a film about Born in the USA or Born to Run. Because Nebraska, Bruce thinks is he's publicly said his most personal, most enduring work, and he thinks his best work, and I would agree with him. I think he felt that because it was a very narrow and specific time frame in his life, and as he said, is the most painful chapter in his life, that if the audience understood Bruce in 1982, they will understand Bruce in a much larger sense. So I think that's why he very quickly said yes to this notion.
His success in the record, Nebraska, I guess we're speaking of. I mean, I don't know. I think that the period in the film and sort of and the way he was making the record and the way he was sort of understanding and revisiting his past and sort of trying to make sense of it. I guess I think of it as a breakthrough moment of sort of honesty and any I think the large amount of success he had with that record was really his own. I think it was like critically well received. I think, what did it debut at number
three?
Number 3, right?
As high as it got.
Yeah, those high as it got. But it's been long lasting, and I think that's because of the honesty of the record. Yeah. I mean, the influence, I think, Bruce has spoken very openly and written about, his relationship with his parents, specifically, his relationship with his father is the sort of one of the main focuses of the film. I think Bruce grew up in a world where, his father is very unpredictable. I think that made it very difficult for him to trust what was around him, and I think a lot of what he's contending with, sort of in the period of this film, is a reaction, to that youth being able to trust, and then I think also because he's reached this sort of level of public notoriety or fame, that trust is even sort of harder to find, and I think we're also contending with him at this period where, I think hopefully for many young people, they can look at their father's parents and put them up on a pedestal for, hopefully a very long time. But at some point, you see a parent for what they are, which is a human. You see them for their faults, and hopefully you can be very accepting and understanding and empathetic of them at that period. And I think that's a real highlight of the film. I've heard people speak about Bruce's relationship to his father and think there was like a tremendous amount of anger there, but I think there was perhaps some disappointment. But I think Bruce always loved his father very much and also made a whole lot of room for understanding for his father. I think that was very important to show, in this film, in this period.
My father introduced to me all of my musical tastes. Opera, classical, jazz, American country music, which led to my first film, Crazy Heart. But when he introduced me to Bruce Springsteen through Nebraska as a disillusioned 18-year-old who was uncertain of his place in the world, was uncertain of his future, uncertain about almost everything as it related to who he was, it came at the right time. So when I read Warren Zaines's book, Deliver Me From Nowhere, which this is based upon, it spoke to me, the emotional honesty, Bruce's uncertainty. He was in disequilibrium. felt a lot like I was. So that was my approach to the screenplay. And then, the day before I started shooting the film, my father passed away. And his spirit carried me through the making of this film. And I have since dedicated the movie to him. And I think he would really like it.
Yeah, I mean, I find, you know, I don't know, the films that sort of mean most to me are ultimately about sort of belonging, purpose, finding family, whether that be of blood or otherwise, and so I guess I'm attracted to these stories of young men, lost men, lonely men, in search of purpose and ultimately belonging. But I think, yes, you're right. Like these two men, Bruce at this period in his life, and Carmen, you know, they're a bit handicapped. I think, at least in these stages, sort of emotionally in their ability to communicate. But I think they're both very skilled. And Bruce especially in sort of communicating through art, through music. I mean, Bruce has said many times, you know, and especially during this period of his life, you know, he has no problem being in the studio. He has no problem being on stage for 3-4 hours. It's really the other 20 hours that he really struggles with. And I think that's something that, yeah, him and Carmen absolutely share.
And in terms of my approach to the film and the aesthetic choices that I made, this era in Bruce's life is well photographed and well chronicled. So my Italian production designer, Stefania Cella, my longtime production designer, was able to wonderfully recreate Bruce's life. It also helped that Bruce led me on, that Stefania and me and my cinematographer, on the very first scout for the film. And he took me to the childhood neighborhood in Freehold, New Jersey. He took me, of course, to Asbury Park, New Jersey, the boardwalk. He took me to the Stone Pony, where Bruce has made iconic and played many, many times, a very small club that we see in the film. He took me to the Power Station recording studio in New York City, where many of his great records were recorded, and where he, for the very first time, took an acoustic version of Born in the USA and electrified that with the E Street Band, which we see in the film. So anytime you make a film about America's most authentic artist, you better make certain that it's authentic. And because this is not a documentary, but because I wanted it to feel like it was, because many things that happened in the story, of course, happened in Bruce's life, and many things that he's never spoken about or written about happened in the film that happened in his life. Being able to shoot in the exact locations where where these events took place, infused the film with the type of authenticity that I could only have dreamed of. There are props in the movie that Bruce Springsteen lent to us, very personal props. A couple of articles of clothing that Jeremy Ware that Bruce gave us out of his archive from this era. So to be able to recreate this world with such specificity, and then to have Bruce come to the set and see that we've recreated it, was one of the great joys of my career, because I know we got that right.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bruce certainly represents a sort of idea of America, like many artists in many different countries do. I think there is a lot of truth in sort of how authentic Bruce's sort of interpretation of America is. I think he's very admired globally because of how people understand America through the lens of Bruce Springsteen. But of course, these things are never so simple. I think, from my perspective, in my opinion, it's a very beautiful version of America. Is that the complete truth or reality of America? No, of course not. I think it's very difficult to be entirely representative for one person to be a representative of a nation. You know?
And I echo what Jeremy said, but I think our goal with this film was to strip away the icon of Bruce Springsteen, strip away the mythology, because everyone has an idea of who Bruce Springsteen is to them. For some people, it's Born in the USA. For some people, it's Darkness on the Edge of Town. For some people, it's Born to Run. Nebraska is one of Bruce's least well-known albums, of course, but one of his most respected. So when Jeremy and I, and Bruce and I, discussed approaching a movie about Bruce Springsteen, it was about not making a myth-making film. It's not about Bruce Springsteen, the icon. It's about a man who is a neglected soul who is repairing himself through music. I said to Jeremy, I said, he just happens to be Bruce Springsteen, but this is a man who is suffering from unresolved trauma. This is a man who, though from the outside world it would appear that everything was going right, he's coming off an incredibly successful tour for the river. He's becoming a superstar. Bruce was very quietly deteriorating inside, and he was living a life of isolation and quiet despair. So that's what we focused on, and not the myth or the icon, to really humanize him.